The silent town of Black Hollow. When I received the job offer to become the overnight caretaker for Black Hollow, I had no idea how much my life would change. Black Hollow wasn't just a town, it was a relic from another era. Nestled deep within the mountains, it was abandoned decades ago for reasons no one could explain. I'd heard rumors of industrial accidents, strange sicknesses, and the occasional whisper of the Black Hollow curse. But the paycheck was enticing, and I was desperate to escape my mundane life. "Just keep the place in order and follow the rules," the supervisor had said over the phone. His voice was gruff, with an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. Fear? Warning? "The rules will be waiting for you in the caretaker's lodge. Follow them, and you'll be fine." The road to Black Hollow was unmarked and winding. By the time I reached the outskirts of the town, the sun was sinking behind the jagged peaks, casting everything in hues of burnt orange and deep shadow. I parked my truck outside the lodge, grabbed my duffel bag, and stepped into what would become my world for the next 6 months. The lodge was dusty, but well-stocked. A small fireplace crackled faintly, though no one had been here in years. A binder sat on the kitchen table with a single label, "Caretaker Rules." Beneath it, a note in looping script read, "Memorize these. Your life depends on it." The rules. Never enter Black Hollow before dusk or after dawn. The boundaries of the town are settled during the day. Lock all doors and windows at sundown, even the ones you're sure no one can fit through. If you hear children laughing outside, do not look. There are no children here. You may hear voices calling your name. Ignore them, even if it's someone you know. Check the clock every hour. If the time is wrong, leave immediately. Do not take anything with you. The well in the center of town must be inspected every night. Shine your flashlight down it and confirm the water is still. If the water is rippling, run. Do not light a fire in the lodge after midnight. If the fireplace lights on its own, do not enter the lodge until dawn. Avoid the church. It is empty now, but sometimes it forgets that. I read the rules twice, my skin crawling with each line. They sounded like the kind of superstitions small-town folks tell to scare each other, but there was a weight to these words, a heaviness that made me shiver despite the warmth of the fire. By the time I stepped outside to begin my patrol, the sky had turned black, and the town loomed in the distance like a forgotten memory. My flashlight's beam cut through the dark, illuminating rows of crumbling houses and overgrown streets. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the gravel. The first night passed without incident, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far, and the air carried a faint whisper I couldn't place. I checked the well, peering down its endless darkness to see the still water below. Nothing happened, but my hands trembled the entire time. It wasn't until the third night that the rules truly began to make sense. It started with laughter. I was halfway through my patrol when I heard it, high-pitched giggles echoing down the main street. My blood turned to ice. My flashlight swung wildly, illuminating the empty road, the decaying storefronts, the rusted street lamps. Nothing. The laughter grew louder, closer. It was unmistakably the sound of children playing, their voices light and joyful. But there were no children here. There hadn't been for decades. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my hands over my ears, willing the sound to stop. It faded after what felt like hours, leaving me shaking and drenched in sweat. The next few nights were worse. I began hearing my name whispered on the wind, soft and familiar. Once, it was my mother's voice, begging me to come home. Another time, it was my best friend, laughing like we were teenagers again. The worst was the night I heard my own voice calling from the direction of the church. I stayed in the lodge as much as possible after that, only venturing out when absolutely necessary. But even the lodge wasn't safe. One night, as I was preparing to sleep, the fire roared to life. It cast dancing shadows on the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my bag and ran into the freezing night, hiding in the ruins of an old bakery until dawn. When I returned to the lodge, the fireplace was cold, its ashes undisturbed. By the second week, I was barely holding on. Sleep was a luxury, paranoia a constant companion. I began to suspect that the rules were less about avoiding danger and more about surviving it. The well was the worst. Each night I shone my flashlight into its depths, praying for still water. But on the 10th night I saw ripples. A faint hum rose from the well, deep and resonant, like the low growl of a distant thunderstorm. The water began to churn, and something moved in the darkness, a shape too large, too impossible to comprehend. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and ran without looking back. The final night was when everything unraveled. The clock in the lodge read 3:17 a.m., though I was certain it was closer to midnight. I remembered Rule 5 and knew what I had to do. Grabbing my bag, I bolted for my truck, but the town seemed different. The streets were narrower, the houses leaning closer together, their windows like eyes watching my every move. I reached the edge of Black Hollow only to find a dense fog blocking the road. Shapes moved within it, figures tall and thin, their limbs unnaturally long. They whispered my name in voices that didn't belong to them. "You can't leave," one of them said, stepping forward. Its face was a blur, a swirling mass of shadow and light. "You belong to Black Hollow now." I don't know how I escaped. One moment, I was running blindly through the fog. The next, I was sitting in my truck miles away, the sun rising over the mountains. The rules binder was on the seat beside me, its pages blank. Black Hollow doesn't exist on any map. I've tried to find it, to warn others, but there's nothing. No record of the town, no mention of it anywhere. Sometimes I wonder if it was all a dream, but then I see the scar on my arm, the mark I don't remember getting, and I know the truth. Some places aren't meant to be found, and some secrets are better left buried. The days after my escape felt hollow. I returned to my mundane life, but nothing felt the same. My apartment felt too small, the sounds of the city too loud, and the faces around me too lifeless. Black Hollow had left an imprint, a shadow I couldn't shake. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I had escaped, but deep down, I knew better. The first sign came a week later. I woke in the middle of the night to find my apartment eerily silent, not the normal quiet of the city, but an oppressive absence of sound. No traffic, no distant sirens, no hum of the refrigerator. Dead blue. I held my breath, straining to hear anything, and then it came. The laughter. The same high-pitched giggles from Black Hollow, faint but unmistakable. They echoed down the hallway outside my door, growing louder. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing my phone, but when I checked the time, it wasn't there. Instead, the screen glitched, the digits shifting erratically, landing finally on 3:17 a.m. My heart raced as the rules flooded back into my mind. If the time is wrong, leave immediately. I threw on clothes and grabbed my keys, rushing out into the hall. The laughter followed me, growing louder and more distorted. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound bouncing off the walls as if I were in a much larger space. When I reached the building's front door, I paused, my hand hovering over the handle. What if it was still out there? What if Black Hollow hadn't let me go after all? I spent the next few nights at a hotel, too afraid to return home, but the presence of other people didn't help. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke to the same eerie silence, followed by faint whispers just outside my door. They never said anything intelligible, but their tone was mocking, almost playful. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I flung open the door expecting to find nothing, but instead, I saw it. A dense fog rolling down the hotel hallway, twisting and writhing like a living thing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they coalesced into a single word. Return. The fog surged toward me, and I slammed the door shut, barricading it with a chair. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I snatched it up, praying for some kind of connection to reality. Instead, the screen displayed a single message. You know the rules. The rules. I had tried to forget them, to leave them behind with Black Hollow, but it seemed they hadn't left me. I realized I had no choice. Whatever I had disturbed in Black Hollow wasn't done with me. The rules weren't just a guide for survival. They were a tether, binding me to that cursed place. If I wanted to end this, I had to go back. The journey felt longer this time. The roads twisted unnaturally, and I frequently found myself doubling back without realizing it. Fog crept along the edges of the road, growing thicker as I neared the town. When I finally reached Black Hollow, the sun was setting, and the town was bathed in an eerie orange glow. The lodge looked the same as when I'd left it, but now it felt alive, like it had been waiting for me. I found the binder on the table, its pages once again filled with the rules. A new rule had been added at the bottom, written in jagged script. 11. You must finish what you started. I didn't know what it meant, but the oppressive weight in my chest told me I would find out soon enough. The patrol began as before, though everything felt sharper, more vivid. The shadows were darker, the silence heavier, and the air carried a faint metallic taste. As I approached the well, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I shone my flashlight down into the depths, and the water was still, but the hum was back, faint but unmistakable. Don't. The voice was a whisper, right next to my ear. I spun around, but no one was there. It's too late, the voice continued, distant now, like it was coming from the well itself. I backed away, my heart pounding, but then I saw them. Figures standing at the edge of the town, just beyond the last row of houses. They were tall and thin, their silhouettes warped like heat mirages. Their faces were featureless, but I could feel their gaze, heavy and unrelenting. They didn't move. They just stood there watching. I don't know what compelled me to go to the church. Maybe it was the way the figures seemed to part as I moved in that direction, as if guiding me. Maybe it was the hum from the well, growing louder the further I walked. Whatever it was, I found myself standing at the crumbling entrance, staring up at the rotting wooden doors. Rule 8 echoed in my mind. Avoid the church. It is empty now, but sometimes it forgets that. The doors creaked open before I could touch them, revealing a darkness so complete it felt alive. My flashlight barely penetrated it, the beam swallowed whole by the void. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing unnaturally, and the doors slammed shut behind me. The church was massive, far larger than it had appeared from the outside. Rows of pews stretched endlessly into the darkness, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. At the far end of the nave stood an altar, and on it lay the binder, its pages glowing faintly. As I approached, the whispers returned, louder and more frenzied. The figures from the edge of town appeared in the pews, their heads turning to follow me. The whispers became a chant, a single word repeated over and over. Finish. I reached the altar and opened the binder. The pages were blank except for a single line. You belong to Black Hollow. The whispers stopped, and the silence was deafening. I turned to see the figures standing in the aisle, their featureless faces inches from mine. One of them reached out, its hand impossibly long, and touched my chest. "You know the rule," it said in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream. The binder in my hands burned, and I dropped it, watching as it disintegrated into ash. The figures stepped closer, their forms shifting and twisting, becoming more human, more familiar. I saw my mother, my best friend, myself. "You never really left," they said in unison. "You never will." The church dissolved around me, and I was back at the lodge, the fire crackling in the hearth. The binder was on the table, the rules neatly written inside. The final rule was still there, its jagged script staring back at me. 11. You must finish what you started. I understood now. Black Hollow wasn't a place you escaped, it was a place you became part of, and I was its new caretaker. The lodge didn't feel like a shelter anymore. It felt like a trap. The fire in the hearth cast long, unnatural shadows across the walls, and the air carried an oppressive weight. I tried to leave, to step outside and breathe fresh air, but the moment I touched the door handle, the room shifted. The walls seemed to stretch, the shadows lengthening until they engulfed the floor. I blinked, and suddenly I was back in the chair, the binder open in front of me. The fire burned low, its crackle now a whisper. "Finish!" I slammed the binder shut and stood, but the fire roared back to life, spewing embers into the air. They swirled, forming words against the darkened ceiling. "Look outside." The thought chilled me, but I couldn't resist. Slowly, I moved to the window. At first, I saw nothing but the fog rolling over the trees, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed movement. The figures were back, standing in a circle around the lodge. They didn't move or make a sound, but I could feel their presence, a suffocating pressure that seeped into my chest. Then, in unison, they pointed to the woods. I knew I had no choice. The lodge wasn't going to let me stay, and the figures weren't going to leave until I followed their direction. I stepped outside, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. The figures didn't move as I passed them, but their heads turned to follow me, their eyeless faces unblinking. The fog thickened as I entered the woods, swallowing the light from my flashlight. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers began again. They were faint at first, like distant echoes, but soon they surrounded me, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of voices. "Turn back. Keep going. Run. Stop." The contradictions made my head spin, but I pressed on. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet seemed to move on their own, guided by an unseen force. The trees around me grew denser, their branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. Eventually, the path ended at a clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its roots gnarled and twisted like claws digging into the earth. At its base lay the binder, its pages fluttering in a wind I couldn't feel. As I approached the tree, the whispers stopped, replaced by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I reached down to pick up the binder, but the moment I touched it, the ground beneath me shifted. The tree's roots came to life, writhing and twisting as they pulled me down into the earth. I struggled, but the roots held fast, dragging me into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was in a cavern. The air was damp and cold, and the walls glistened with a strange, otherworldly light. The binder was in my hands, but its pages were blank. A voice echoed through the cavern, deep and resonant. "Read." The words began to appear on the pages, written in blood-red ink. Rule 12. The tree is not your friend. It never was. Rule 13. The binder knows your secrets. Do not try to hide from it. Rule 14. To escape, you must give it what it wants. I turned the page and the words shifted, forming a single, haunting sentence. What will you sacrifice? The cavern began to tremble, and the whispers returned, louder and more frenzied than ever. Figures emerged from the shadows, their forms indistinct but undeniably human. They circled me, their faces shifting between those of my loved ones. My mother, my father, even myself. You can leave, one of them said in a voice that was both familiar and alien. But only if you give us what we want. I clutched the binder to my chest, my heart racing. What do you want? They didn't answer. Instead, they began to chant, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Images flashed through my mind, memories, moments, pieces of my soul. I realized what they were asking for. My identity. My very being. If I gave it to them, I could leave. But would I still be me? I don't know how long I sat there, trapped in indecision. The cavern continued to shake, the figures closing in around me. Finally, I made my choice. I tore a page from the binder, the words bleeding onto my hands, and held it out to them. The figures hesitated, their forms flickering like dying flames. Then, one by one, they reached out, their hands merging with the page until it disintegrated into ash. The cavern trembled one last time before collapsing into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the lodge. The fire burned low, and the binder was gone. The figures outside had disappeared, and the oppressive silence had lifted. But I didn't feel relief. I felt empty, as if a part of me had been left behind in that cavern. The rules were gone from my mind, but their weight remained. I left Black Hollow that morning vowing never to return, but the town doesn't let you go so easily. Weeks later, I began to notice things, shadows that moved on their own, whispers in the dead of night, and the binder, always the binder. No matter how many times I destroyed it, it would reappear, its pages blank and waiting. The final rule still haunts me, written in jagged script that burns itself into my vision every time I close my eyes. 11. You must finish what you started. Black Hollow isn't a place, it's a part of me now, and it always will be.